Hello, welcome everybody to the Solutions podcast. I'm here with Richard and Saskia, other biomimetic fanatics, and we are here today to share a little bit about our love of biomimicry, what it is, and where do we think it has a place in the future. So welcome, Richard and Saskia, and good to have you here. So maybe we can start with Richard and Saskia to ask where did you first hear about biomimicry and what got you so interested?
Oh, well, it's a big question. I probably first came across it about 14 years ago. We're doing a project called Learning from Nature. So rather than learning about nature or learning in nature, we're trying to explore, well, what can we learn from nature? I think we'd seen some of these ideas of how nature doesn't create waste, for example, and we're working, well, how does that happen in nature? And what can we learn from how nature deals with something like waste, which is only kind of a human idea. Nature doesn't produce waste, it produces food for something else. And we're looking, well, how can we turn that into a principle that young people can learn from and apply to their lives? I think through that kind of research and that engagement, we came across the whole idea of biomimicry, of how do we mimic what nature does and turn it into useful ways of solving human design challenges. And then, yeah, so since then, really, and I've always had that kind of interest of being in outdoors and looking at nature and just kind of experiencing how nature does things differently to the way that humans do it.
Yeah, and it gives you a real sense of wonder even more, doesn't it? When you start to kind of like see some of these examples and really think about it, and it makes total sense, but it also makes you look at the world in a totally different way.
Yeah, and that nature's taught us so many ways to do one thing, but humans do in one way, which is often quite dumb. But nature's got hundreds of strategies to do the same thing, and you go, wow, I didn't think of that.
Yeah, and the more we know, the less we know, it's almost like.
Right.
Saskia.
Yeah, well, for me, maybe it started about at the same time as Richard, I think. I was then working with Shell as a game changer, which was a team and a process to help people come up with, radical innovation, help people to move crazy ideas forward. And at some point, we didn't get so many ideas, but lots of challenges that different teams were coping with. And I started a program to help those people come up with creative ideas to address those challenges. And you have many ways of doing that. But then one of my colleagues pointed me to biomimicry. And so we had a first workshop then with lots of people from R&D, and I was overwhelmed with all those potential solutions that were out there. But maybe even more struck me is that only then I really felt that I was nature as well. I knew it, I knew it, but I never really felt it. And for me, then all the things connected. I was already sort of future oriented, was thinking about how can we move more, how can take corporates more social responsibility and sustainability. And now this whole reconnect with nature came with that. So within 6 months, I left the company, started Biomimicry Netherlands with some other people, took a deep dive into it, also got my master's in biomimicry and did the biomimicry certification program, the professional program. So yeah, it never stopped loving it since.
Yes, I totally feel the same. And it just seems like a long journey we're on. And there isn't going to be an end in our lifetime because we will continue to be learning something.
Yeah.
And what really kind of interested me was I felt that there was a real lack of visioning of the future. And most people, when you talk to them about the future, it's quite apocalyptic. We don't have any films or with some positive vision of the future. It's all quite doom and gloom. And so I thought, well, how are we ever going to get there if we can't see it? And if we can't envisage that another world is possible, And so, of course, when I came across biomimicry, it was just like, whoa, okay, this is showing us that what the world could look like and the potential that we have, you know, in envisioning the future. And so, you know, when I've been, you know, working with students, and, you know, it's, you know, you can really see their eyes open when you show them, and it gives them so much hope that another future is possible, which seems kind of quite lacking in today's world. That, you know, we are so focused on the kind of the climate and ecological breakdown. It's like, well, okay, we've got to have another vision of what's to come. So, you know, I'd love to explore that with you, some of the futuristic ideas that you have been seeing coming through in biomimicry, and how you envisage the future.
I think it's a really pertinent point. We've just been working with upper primary school pupils, and they're very good at looking at the past and the present. But when it comes to the future, I think we suffer from this idea of this kind of received wisdom. It's what we've always been told to do: drive less, walk a bit more, pick up litter, and we don't really teach the future. It's kind of assumed that the future will happen. We don't really teach it. So we found that pupils and teachers struggle to teach about the future. I think that the kind of beauty of biomimicry is, as it's a design-based approach, it actually helps you think about and design the future from a very practical, tangible way. It's not kind of pink unicorns and fantasy ideas of floating hoverboards, which may or may not happen, but it's a very practical kind of way of thinking about the future and designing something which might work. And that to me is the kind of the beauty of it. It's very grounded and rooted in a reality that's possible and doable. And also it's observable. So you can go outside, as you say, you can observe how nature's done this for 3.8 billion years and remains a sustainable system. And it's doable because you can see it with your own eyes. You can see nature's done it. And then, of course, nature's full of wonderful ideas, and biomimicry is coming up with all sorts of inventions which you would never have thought of, looking at a cow's udder and seeing how it expands on impact. And that is a way of creating safety devices which then cushion impact more effectively when you crash, based on looking at a cow's udder. Who would have thought of looking at a cow's udder as inspiration for the future? But you want to design more crash resistant bicycle helmets or shin guards for footballers, or impact systems in cars and public transport. Then the cow's udder is a thing which, as you impact, it expands to absorb impact rather than contracts. So they're creating materials which expand on impact to absorb the impact rather than contract. So, just something as ordinary as a cow's udder is inspiring future creations.
Right.
Yeah, it's really cool. I sometimes see us humans as being like the ghost riders, that we go into, like we go actually the wrong way, but that also suggests that there is a right way if you go the wrong way. So I think if we I think we are the only organism that is fouling our own nest, that is maybe drilling 3 kilometers down to get our energy. So there's a lot of things that we do that are that at some point in time seemed smart, but now that we face all the consequences of the negative by effects, we see, a lot of the elders, the other organisms, are doing it in a much smarter way. So I think there is the reason why biomimicry is so hopeful, that we can also distill patterns that all these other organisms are adhering to and developing some strategies that can help us. So I think it's probably a bit too much to go into all that content, but that there is actually a framework that comes with biomimicry that can help us to emulate those strategies. And well, there's so many innovations happening in healthcare, in agriculture, in transportation, in our food systems, that I think if more people start understanding how it's done and start doing it, build the skills that come with it, then we can have a wonderful future together.
I think those system principles are really important, that humans tend to design with themselves in mind, whereas nature tends to design with the whole system in mind. So nature builds things which can naturally biodegrade back into their raw elements.
Yeah.
So other things can take them up, whereas we tend to produce things which are complex and don't degrade back into the raw elements, and therefore don't become reusable.
Well, I'm not just sure if they do it with the system in mind. You know, I think all the organisms are doing their own thing, but because it's benefiting the larger system, it's sort of strengthening, reinforcing feedback. Because if it would damage the larger system, it would stop at some time. And I think that's a wonderful lesson from nature, that nobody can take care of its offspring in 7 generations time. It's only our living environment that can support and nourish us. So that's why we need to take care of that. And there's a lot of examples of how other organisms are doing that. And maybe not intentionally, but it's because it's benefiting other life systems or life forms. It stays there, I think.
Yeah. It's, when we see how broad it is, and I think that this is what it's seeming quite difficult for universities, for example, to kind of like, it's all so siloed into different areas. And when we're looking at biomimicry, whether we're learning about communications or architecture or materials design, or they're all these very diverse areas. And so it's like, how do we actually kind of bring all this together? And where do you start if you want to study it? So yeah, I think a lot of students really kind of starting to question this. Well, what do I start with learning? Do I start with biology, or do I start with design, or how do I get into biomimicry? So what would be your advice there?
Well, I know there are a couple of universities that run that have like a master's program here in the Netherlands. There's Bioinspired Innovation. The Arizona State University has a complete biomimicry master's, but I think there's also a lot of minors within maybe design academies or in engineering that have like one subject that involves biomimicry. So it's not like you spend 2 years on it. But I'm teaching some guest lectures, and sometimes I have groups that are a mix of economy students and ecology students, or it's a mix of biology and engineering. So, but these are more the, and I'm not sure if our school system is different than in the UK, where sometimes you have some liberty to choose some subjects, and some of them have some biomimicry in it. But yeah, it's not everywhere yet.
Yeah. And the more we can actually just keep this conversation going, and it's not just about students being able to think differently and to use their imagination in a way that hasn't really been promoted before, but also for businesses. At the end of the day, there's some cost saving benefits to biomimicry as well. So, although, a lot of our interest is really in the environment and how we can benefit the environment at this time, there is the other side where actually, we've got some examples of any businesses which have actually saved money through using any kind of biomimetic examples.
Yes, there are some really nice examples. I think maybe one of the most renowned one is Interface, the carpet tile manufacturer. When they started with biomimicry in the late 90s, they were a completely fossil-based company, and at some point in time they said, well, by 2020 we don't want to have any negative impact anymore. And one of their first biomimicry inventions was a carpet tile that was mimicking the design of a forest floor in fall. If you see all these little leaves on the floor, you would pick up one and put it somewhere else. The design is different, but not really. It still looks the same. So that's brought them to the idea of random design. And it had lots of cost-saving benefits, because now there were no production mistakes anymore. All the carpet tiles could be a little different. Whereas before they needed to dye them, they need to have lots of stock. Sometimes the dye that they used were just a little off color, so then they would have more production mistakes. But also how you put them on the floor didn't matter anymore. It was much quicker to install them. There was less cutting waste, so lots of benefits there. And then so cost savings, but also lots of profit was made from that whole carpet tile line. And then because they had such a success with biomimicry in this, then the next thing was, normally carpet tiles are glued to the floor, so they don't move and you don't trip on them. But that is really difficult if you want to recycle them. So they were looking at geckos, feet and other things, and they came up with a way to eliminate all the toxic glue. And that made recycling much easier. So now almost everything that they do is carbon negative in the manufacturing process. So they don't have to pay for the carbon offsettings, but you can imagine if you can reuse materials, it's always in the end cheaper. Well, hopefully, if the tax system supports it, then going somewhere and find the new materials. So it's benefiting them in many ways. They are not using as much energy anymore. So at the systems level, it really helped them.
Yeah, I think there are definitely companies, especially in technology, Cisco Systems or some of the white goods manufacturers, who are looking at, with the legislation now means they have to take the product back at the end of life. They've got to design things they can deassemble and remanufacture or reuse somehow. So they're starting to use how nature would metaphorically think about doing the same thing. And I think businesses recognize that natural resource scarcity is going to have an increasing impact on their business. Yeah. Now, just purely from a business point of view, they want to maintain their business going forward. Therefore, they've got to start rethinking, and even countries are going along those lines. So it doesn't, sometimes it's not. Biomimicry hasn't been the driver, but it's been a solution. They've seen resource scarcity. They've seen that a country can't feed all the population based on a certain agriculture system. So they're looking for a different way to do that, and biomimicry is offering a solution. So it doesn't have to be driven by kind of an ethos of living harmoniously with nature, which is important. But often the biomimicry just comes along as a solution, and then slowly wins companies over, like it did with interface. That actually, it's not just about good design, it's about the ethos of design and what we use design for, and what's the purpose of designing something. Are we designing something which is benefiting human society and the natural world in general, or is it just for profit? It's interesting how biomimicry kind of seeps, can come in from different angles and can kind of seep into the ethos of a business or an organization.
Right. And what I also like is sometimes it's about dissolving the problem if you come up with a natural example. So for instance, I think another good and maybe classic example is the Harare Building, or the Eastgate Center in Harare, the office, a large office that was inspired by how termites cool their termite mound. And by mimicking that, they don't need an expensive air conditioning anymore. So they can skip the installation costs, but also the the running, the exploitation costs of cooling the system, just at looking how termites make ventilation shafts and things like that. So that's a huge saving there. And there's many more examples like that.
Yeah, and I think that's what unites all businesses really, is this actually, how can we make more profit? How can we use less resources and actually save money to make it? And and these examples are exactly that. It's like nature's really, really good at saving energy and resources and using as little as possible.
Yeah.
And with the the Harare Building, when I think about it, and it's just like, God, the number one worst thing for climate change are hydrofluorocarbons, which we've, in drawdown, they speak about that as the number one thing we need to deal with is refrigeration and air conditioning. And so, here we have this massive elephant in the room that's using so much problematic gases, and, how can we turn that around? And it doesn't feel like it's been getting enough attention on that point that we have to, seriously reduce the amount of HFCs. And here we have a brilliant example of, how much energy was saved by not having, in a modern city in Africa, every room would have an aircon unit. So to have created this whole building with no aircon, it really is a great example of, how the future can look.
Yeah, and I think with that, sometimes, especially maybe architects, they just need to put their egos aside. That you implement something that somebody else came up with. That's also sometimes what people, because sometimes I ask myself, why doesn't everybody do it? And I say, well, we don't have the same circumstances as Harare. There it's at night, it's very cold, and during the day it's very hot. Over here in Europe or in the UK and the Netherlands, it's closer. But a good friend of mine, Lydia Fraaije, she's a biomimicry architect, and she's building her own biomimicry house. It's a showcase house, and she's using the same, let's say, termite inspired technology over here. So it can be done. And
And that's exactly what we want, isn't it? It's replication in whatever we do. And, I'm working on something similar myself, and it keeps coming back to it, but we have to make it so that other people can replicate what we're doing. That's the level, the success is what we're doing if somebody's copying it. And there is that kind of an interesting way between kind of competition and cooperation. Mm-hmm. And so as we kind of move more towards, come on, let's all get in the boat together, let's all cooperate, share. And I think that's what's been so great about Ask Nature, which that website has been totally founded on that principle of, let's all share information. So I'm not sure, have you used that much in your work?
Well, Saskia and I are working on a particular project at the moment with 15 to 18-year-olds. And it's basically a biomimicry design platform, but it's really based on teams individually taking on challenges which are shared, but collaboration is the way to success. So it's a slightly gamified approach where we're using points to encourage people to collaborate and to get young people to sense that actually by learning from others, they can create better design solutions. And in a way, it's what we've always done. We've always kind of stood on the shoulders of other people, but we don't really recognize it. But we're trying to kind of game the system to get young people to think that, okay, I can come up with an idea and a neat solution, but actually by collaborating and learning from somebody who's really good about the engineering side of things or the chemistry side of something, when I'm good at the kind of biology side or the design bit, they come up with a better solution. And the goal is about better solutions, not so much about ownership of individual property or kind of intellectual ideas. So it's kind of, in a way, it goes right against the grain of a lot of the education system. Now, in education system, cheating, copying somebody's work in an exam is cheating. In business, it's called collaboration and working together. So we're trying to get beyond this idea that individualism is what matters. And individualism isn't going to save us. It's collaborating and learning together that's going to save us. And doing it across Europe is strengthening that social bond as well.
Yeah, and also in that project that Richard just mentions, students are also encouraged to go to Ask Nature for finding some inspiration to the challenges they want to solve. And then indeed, on top of it, teams are encouraged to collaborate as well. And I did a biomimicry training yesterday for professionals, and we also spend time in that. We do like a pressure cooker style biomimicry innovation, and people also use Ask Nature then. Yeah, so it's a great source.
It's a fantastic website, but I think also we encourage people to go outside and look at a leaf, a twig, and start to look at how nature. I think part of the ethos of biomimicry, which is really sometimes missed, is kind of we need to recognize that we are part of the natural world. We don't live in isolation from it. So when we're designing as a species embedded within nature and reliant upon it, not as a species which is outside of nature and can design without really thinking about the impacts of what we do. And that's created a lot of the challenges we face today. So going out and looking at how you might look at how a tree adapts to particular environmental conditions and how it manages its stress and strain and how it uses curves and cut out corners to dissipate stress, which is mimicked in airplane design. But at the same time, you see that tree is embedded into a landscape, and how it embeds in that landscape is also kind of system principles. So you get a broader perspective by actually doing that first-hand connectivity. And then as nature gives you all the research that other people have done in such a depth that you couldn't possibly do on your own. So you get both of those two things running together, I think is really, really important. You need the ethos as well as the emulate part of it, and then the reconnect, which is Saskia will tell us are the three kind of underlying principles of biomimicry: the reconnecting, the emulating, and the ethos. And those things need to work together if we're talking about sustainability for the planet upon which we are one of billions of species.
And I think going outside and looking different at nature, it's also a skill that you can start building yourself from today onwards, because behind most of the forms and shapes that you can observe, there is some function going on by it's helping that organism. And being curious about it. And I think especially for people that are working for place-based innovation. So if you're in the built environment, I know here in the Netherlands, I did a talk for people in that field, and they said, well, we don't even really look at where the sun comes from. If we start positioning if we want to build a new sort of row of houses, it's all the urban planning is not taking into account the circumstances that we can observe when we go outdoors. And that to me it feels like it's completely disconnected from where we live. So an understanding of that, and where is most of the prevailing winds coming from, the rains, when is it? What does it mean for our roofs? All that sort of things is, if you don't take into account the immediate sort of environment, what are you doing?
You're almost designing in the need for extra energy use in terms of heating, cooling systems, which is creating more cost. And why would you make things cost more?
Well, maybe the urban planners are working with the energy companies. So the idea is to make them as inefficient as possible so that people have to buy more power. Whereas what we're saying is exactly the opposite. How can we design to use as least power as possible? And and then that fitting in with the environment. And and exactly, so when that kind of question came to me of like, well, the next time you're walking in nature, look at something and ask why. Why are you like that? Why do you take that form? What is your function? What are you doing? And even the simplest things that we can look at when we start questioning nature, we go on a whole journey with it. I mean, I've often kind of marveled at massive trees that are leaning on some gradient, against gravity. It's like, how do you do that? How do you possibly hold up tons of wood without actually falling down? So there's still so much we've got to learn as to how it does that.
There's a colleague of ours called Sam Steer in the States who says, what is nature's talent? So what is nature good at? There's a very practical question. What is nature good at? And sucking water up to the tops of trees without using any energy. How does nature do that? It's a really interesting way of going for a walk. What is this leaf, this tree, this twig, this whatever good at? What's its talents?
Right.
So just before we come to an end, would you all give one of our favorite biomimetic juicy examples for those people that don't know much about, the amazing, I'm sure after this, they will go and explore it. Even you just type in biomimicry and you'll get a whole world. But there are so many great examples out there. And I know Richard came up with the cow's bladder as one, and bladder, udder. So have you got any others you'd like to share?
I'll give you one. I'll give Saskia time to think. I've been looking at the Saharan silver ant. So obviously it lives in a very hot environment, and it's got to try and keep cool. So its exoskeleton has these kind of microscopic pyramid designs all across it. What the pyramid design does, it breaks up light as it comes in. So it breaks up light into different UV wavelengths, and it enables it to refract and bounce off more efficiently. So less of the heat gets absorbed by the ant and more of it gets reflected back into the atmosphere. And I was thinking that, what if we could create similar surfaces on the structure of buildings in hot countries? So less of the heat gets absorbed and more of it gets reflected, maybe reflected to heat water or do something useful, but also it's reducing the temperature inside a building and therefore reducing our need for electric means of cooling or air conditioning or fans, etc., etc. But you look at an ant that lives in a very hot environment, it must somehow keep cool. So how does it do that? And then you start going, if it can do that with structure and form, we can surely mimic that structure and form into the surfaces of buildings.
I can see it. I can see it already. I can see the building in my mind.
Yeah, there's a research project out there for somebody.
There is, absolutely. One for you, Saskia.
Oh, my mind is debating about two.
Yes, it's hard to choose.
No, so I think the one that got me into biomimicry, so I think most of our sustainability thinking is about doing things a little bit less harmful. But in a way, it's keeping us doing the things that we are doing. This example is from a company, Blue Planet, that made me go into biomimicry, is because what normally with our traditional process of making cement, for each ton of cement, we also emit a ton of CO2, and we see CO2 at the poison of our era. What they do, they looked at how corals are made from dissolved CO2 and calcium carbonate in the ocean. So corals make their structures from CO2, like trees do, shells do. So for them, CO2 is a building block. And Blue Planet, well, they managed to take now CO2 from smokestacks, let's say, bubble it through seawater and out precipitate the materials to make the cement. So now for each ton of cement, they need a half a ton of CO2. So that is completely the world upside down. And I think, we can do much more innovations like those.
And it exactly shows, the ultimate solutions, really. It's, that's actually my job title. I'm a solutionist. And that's why biomimicry fits so well, because it's like, these are the solutions. They are possible. They're already out there. And something as well, which, is really, kind of poked my interest is in the world of fashion. That we know that fashion is such an issue with cotton, so much pesticides, so much water's used, or otherwise it's made out of petrochemicals, all the nylons and the polyester. Fashion as we see it right today is not working. And then we see now, with Spiber and bulk threads and companies which are learning from the spider, how with dead flies and water do you make this incredibly strong material, and are coming up with these new kind of vegan spider silk materials and linking up with companies like North Face and Nike, and all of these which are actually kind of getting it that these are the future of fibers and textiles. So I think that there is it's so broad, and whether, say, like our interest is in building or fashion or communications, there is so much that we can learn from biomimicry. So I want to thank you both for your time and encourage the listeners to go and explore this amazing world of biomimicry. And I will include the links of Richard and Saskia so you can find out more about their work as well. So thank you all, and until next time.